This podcast is not safe for work and will feature movie spoilers. It will feature scenes described of a graphic nature. It will contain language which most listeners may find offensive. Welcome to the podcast Under the Stairs. Hi everyone and welcome to the podcast Under the Stairs. This is episode 572. I'm your host Duncan. Welcome to the show. Now, for those interested in skipping out all the blurb at the beginning of this episode, which isn't going to run too long, but is going to run a bit because I got some explaining to do. Use the time codes, jump a chapter, get to the movie review. For those that are instantly confused as to why there is a brand new episode in your feed after 8 months or something, hang on, I'm about to explain that. And for those that may have just stumbled across this for the first time, have no idea what it is that they're checking out, welcome. There is thousands of over 1,000 episodes in the back catalogue there for you to jump in and check out anytime anyway. But I'm your host Duncan McLeish. Welcome to the show. It's been a while. It's been a hot minute if you want, and yeah, I'm back now. Like I said, I'm going to give a bit of context to this. Last episode I recorded was a review on The Monkey, so do the math. I think that was back in May that came out, and I put the show on a kind of pause at that point, mostly because I had another show in mind, and I wanted to give the full quote-unquote wankery creative process a chance to breathe, and I've been doing that. So since July, I've been running a other podcast, completely myself and the Baz on every single episode, called the B-Movie Blitzkrieg. Now, links to that will be in the show notes, and we are more than halfway through its first season, which will conclude in March this year. I kind of had lost my interest in doing this, if I'm being honest. I kind of felt like I was just going through the motions. The guests that were getting on were really, really interesting, but even then, at that point, I was recycling through the same guests over and over again. And yeah, I was in a bit of a creative lull, is the best way to put it. I only ever want to do these if they're fun for me, and if you guys enjoy listening to them. As soon as either one of those elements kind of drops out, or both, I don't want to do them. There's no point. I get no enjoyment out of it, and recording podcasts is a bit of a time-consuming exercise, even for someone like myself who doesn't sleep that much. There's still a lot of stuff that goes on. So, suffice to say, I kind of lost my interest in it. However, you guys have been reaching out almost once a week, sometimes more than one time a week since then, asking what's happening with the show, when's it coming back, is this a permanent thing, is it a temporary thing, and I didn't have a good answer, is the short answer. I didn't know when I wanted to come back, I didn't even know if we were ever going to come back, and this year I have decided that, and this is a temporary thing, this year I've decided I'm going to bring the show back and try and run it for a year and see how we feel, but once again pretty much on my own terms, in that I'm only really going to review what I want to review. I'm not really going to do anything that I don't want to do, which mostly means that the reviews, for the most part, out with the series that we'll get to in a second, the movies that I pick for the main ones will predominantly be movies that I like. So if you're one of these people tuning in to find someone eviscerate movies, not the show for you. Mostly every movie that will be discussed this year will be movies that I love, so scoring will reflect that. Now, I am bringing back some of the long-running series as well to sit alongside this. The 88 Films Italian collection, I'll be doing those. We got to a point where I think I've got about 8 behind the current cycle, so I'll continue on with them. I'm also bringing back the Slasher Classics collection, which upsets me greatly. I did think they finished off at 50, but I think we're up about 57 or 58 in the release cycle, so I'll be doing them as well. That's where I can guarantee there will be some negative reviews that come in. Both those series have dips in quality on the Slasher Classics more than the Italian collection. So once again, just keep your eyes open for that. At the moment, I'm going to run this show without guests. That may change. There may be an opportunity to chat about something with someone or an interview. Sometimes with some screeners that I get, there's the option to chat to filmmakers, etc. I do enjoy that, so that might happen. So here's what I'm saying. Here's the closing line. Here is everything I've just said for the last 5 minutes condensed into a very short, succinct passage for you to take forward. The podcast Under the Stairs is back. It's going to be me, mostly me, for the predominant runtime of this for the next year, and it may finish at the end of the year. If everything's great, it may continue on. I will be doing slasher classics, I'll be doing Italian collection, and I will only be reviewing movies that I want to review on this show. However, if you like the fun, the quirk, the bants, then please check out the B-movie Blitzkrieg. It is a once every fortnight podcast with 20 episodes per season, and we're almost finished season 1. I will be putting links in there, and on this feed in the next week or so, I will be dropping an episode of that show, so you can take it out as a sampler and hopefully go away, subscribe and check that out. I've returned. And if we're returning, we're seeking some revenge. And if we're going to do revenge, then we have to pick off arguably one of the grittiest, gnarliest, sleaziest, and not cheesiest revenge movies ever made. So on this episode, I am going to be discussing Miss 45 from 1981, directed by Abel Ferrara. This is one that I am surprised that actually in the over 1,300 episodes of the podcast Under the Stairs, I've never discussed. So it may have appeared here or there in a series, but there's never been a review. And it's just recently been released on a lovely 4K UHD from the folks over at Arrow Film/Video. So I picked up a copy over Christmas, and I thought, what better way to come back than talk about something a little bit gnarly. So I'm going to take my first break of this episode. When I come back, we'll be talking a little bit about the movie itself, the features on the Blu-ray, and my thoughts overall. I'm going to try and keep it as non-spoilery as possible, even if the movie's been out for as long as it has. I know some people will not have checked it out. So we're going to take a very short break. You are going to hopefully see the trailer for the movie. Sometimes those get flagged, but we'll see what we can do. Trailer for the movie, and when I return, I'm going to be discussing Miss 45. I'm going to be doing it right after this.
Every day, on every street, in every city, women are insulted, abused, threatened.
Nana, what's the matter?
What's the matter with you?
Are you planning on going with someone? Would you like to go with me?
Much too beautiful to be a model.
What's her secret? What is she hiding? Where is she going?
So before we really get into talking about Miss 45, I think it is worth setting the table a bit, because this is one of those movies where context kind of changes everything. And if you know anything from listening to podcasts Under the Stairs for all these years, I'm a firm believer that context is king. Miss 45 comes out in 1981, right at the tail end of that kind of grimy New York era, where the city on screen feels more like a threat and less like a location. This is the same cinematic New York that gave us movies like Taxi Driver, Cruising, The Warriors, Maniac. A city that feels overcrowded, dangerous, and totally indifferent to whoever's trying to survive in it. And Miss 45 doesn't just use that as a vibe, it, if anything, leans directly into it. On paper, the setup seems simply brutal. Thana, a young garment worker who's mute, is living alone in Manhattan, and on her way home from work, she's assaulted at gunpoint. She makes it home, but is then assaulted again by a man who follows her into her apartment. She kills him in self-defense, finds his .45 handgun, and from there the movie tracks her slow, ugly transformation as she starts taking that gun out into the city. And yeah, that description alone probably sets off some alarm bells, especially if you've ever seen any other rape, revenge or vigilante movies from this era. But what's interesting about Miss 45 is how little it actually behaves like those movies. If you're thinking of things along the lines of I Spit in Your Grave, it's not that movie. This is a more autistic and art house director at the helm. There's no big revenge fantasy here. There's no sense of triumph at all. If anything, the movie feels cold, tense, and kind of miserable on purpose. The movie, as I mentioned before, is directed by Abel Ferrara, who at this time was still very early in his career, coming right off the back of The Driller Killer, a movie which made the video nasties list in the UK. Possibly because of the front cover, but certainly there's plenty in the movie that would have shocked those that were not of a grindhouse and exploitation bent. And if you're familiar with Ferrara later on, you can already see his fingerprints all over this. He's fascinated by moral rot, guilt, by the violence, and something that spreads instead of resolve. He's not interested in making you feel good, or even letting you off the hook. And Miss 45 might be one of the purest expressions of that mindset. The movie is incredibly stripped down. There's barely any exposition, no backstory dumps, no inner monologues, which you would think would be the obvious thing to do with a mute character, but we don't go down what would ultimately become a cliche in cinema. And a huge part of that comes off from the casting. Zoe Lund, credited in this movie as Zoe Timerlis, at the time playing Thana. She's mute, and she comes off almost entirely as a silent performance. She doesn't explain herself, she doesn't give speeches, everything has to be physical. The way she holds herself, the way she moves through the space, the way her presence changes as the movie goes on. It's doing all the heavy lifting. And honestly, it's kind of wild when you think about it, of how effective it actually is. The more Thana withdraws, the more upsetting the movie becomes, and you never really fully get inside her head, and Ferrara seems to want it that way. You're watching this person shut down and harden in real time, with the city constantly pressing her from every side. Visually, the movie feels harsh and unpolished. Think Driller Killer, but slightly more refined. And in a lot of respects, that works for this movie. The apartments are cramped, the streets are overcrowded, but emotionally empty. There's no glamour here at all. Even the score, the music by Joe Delia, who Ferrara would go on and collaborate with a lot, has this kind of repetitive, almost hypnotic quality that just keeps tightening the screw. Everything it kind of feels inevitable. Like once the process starts, there's no clean way out. When Miss 45 first came out, no one or no thing really helped its reputation. The movie got hit hard by critics and audiences alike, and a lot of people wrote it off as a sleazy exploitation movie, or even an excuse to be irresponsible or straight up misogynistic. And to be fair, this was at a time where theatres were flooded with movies that were easy to either lump into that category or totally deserving of those monikers. This movie isn't Death Wish and all the knockoffs that came on afterwards, but at the same time it holds a huge degree of importance. Even then, people seem to battle over their opinions for it. Over time, those battles became a little bit easier, and people started to look at it again and see that the movie's actually doing something very different. Modern critical tends towards Miss 45 are that it's deeply uncomfortable on purpose. The movie never celebrates what Thana does, and never frames her violence as empowering or cleansing. If anything, the more she acts, the more isolated and unhinged she becomes. Violence doesn't fix anything, it just spreads. I love the reappraisal also comes from how the film handles gender and rage. Thana doesn't just target her attackers, and that choice is still controversial. Some people read the kind of indictment of culture as at a time where women are constantly endangered, and that is true in a lot of respects and still is in cinema today. Others see it as a warning about what happens when trauma turns into indiscriminate violence. Once again, themes that we still discuss in cinema today. The movie refused to tell you which reading is correct, and that ambiguity is probably why it still sparks arguments this far on from its release, some 40 odd years later. Today, Miss 45 has this strange second life. It's a cult classic. It gets the occasional screening and restored releases like the Arrow one that we're going on to discuss around special features. It has a huge amount of academic attention as well, with film scholars going back over and relitigating matters. But it's still a movie that is uncomfortable to watch, and that's the point. In an era where there's a lot of violent movies that go out their way just to justify themselves as smooth, over the edges, Miss 45 just sits there abrasive and unresolved. So going into a discussion about the Arrow release, I think it's key for us to keep in mind that the movie isn't really asking for your approval. It's not trying to be liked. If you know Abel Ferrara, he never tries to please. It's trying to make you uncomfortable and kind of then leave you there. And whether that makes it powerful, troubling, or both, that's really where the conversation will always need to start. And here we are with the release. This is Miss 45, released by Arrow. In terms of what this actually brings to you, the viewer, over and above, there is a brand new 4K restoration, 4K UHD restoration from Arrow Films, along with the original 35mm camera negative, high definition 1080p Blu-ray, original lossless mono audio. In terms of the special features here, this is where it gets kind of cool. You've got a brand new commentary on this release by Alexandria Heller-Nicholas, author of Rape Revenge films A Crucial Study and Cultographies, Miss 45. The Voice of Violence, which is a new feature with film critic BJ Colaglio, Where Dreams Go to Die, a new featurette with film critic and former guest on the show, Kat Ellinger, archival interview with director Abel Ferrara, archival interview with composer Joe Delia, archival interview and creative consultant Jack McIntyre, Zoe XO, and this is kind of cool for this release, a 2004 short film directed by Paul Rackman, and Zoe Rising, a 2011 short film directed by Paul Rackman. Those both star Zoe Lund, so that's why they're important here. You get things like the theatrical trailer, you get things like image galleries, and fold-out posters, all the usual stuff that you would get. So, well worth your time. They've actually done a good job with this release. I'm not trying to act too surprised when we come to Arrow Video, but they put some time into this one. It's been a while since anyone was overly clamouring for, I think, a 4K or 4K UHD release of Miss 45, but they've kind of pulled out the stops for this one, for sure. The movie looks gorgeous. One of those things where I've got a great TV. I don't want to boast, but I do. And any chance that I get for like movies that are particularly old, that have been released in the 4K and the 4K UHD environment, to have a chance to sit and watch them and see where the polish exists, really is one of those things that does marvel me. Like, you would think on paper, cleaning up some of the grit from Miss 45 would be counterproductive. It would take away some of the kind of overbearing atmosphere of the movie. But actually, if anything, it doesn't. I think it spotlights how good Abel Ferrara was this early in his career. I have always thought that Driller Killer is like expertly shot, and Miss 45 just continues that trend on. And by the time you're getting up to movies like Bad Lieutenant, Ferrara is like effortlessly flexing that art house, claustrophobic, gnarly, gritty sensibility all over the screen. So it's brilliant from that point of view. Having went through all the special features, the 2 video essays are very much worth your time. The one from BG, which looks more the kind of presence of kind of feminism in cinema from the time period, is really, really, really good. Kat Ellinger's one is awesome. She really has a way of distilling down kind of gritty art house cinema in a way that just makes me very happy. I've got a ton of them. We'll probably be doing a few of them this year. Jean Roland movies from Indicator, and she did the documentary, which was when we interviewed her. And I remember speaking of movies from his catalogue I didn't know about that I now have on 4K UHD, and I'm kind of like very excited to get dumped in. Of course, we'll give you the thoughts. So that's a really, really, really cool release. Having revisited this movie for the first time in over a decade, it's still as uncomfortable to watch. And as I said in the upfront, I think the strength of it is the fact we have no inner monologue for the character, for Thana. I think we follow her in a way where it becomes difficult. We try and put ourselves in her mindset, but because she's closed off that way and we don't get that dialogue, some of her actions become harder and harder to kind of justify. It reminds me a lot of Gaspar Noé's Irreversible, a movie which challenges you at every time jump point before if the actions you see at the beginning of the movie are actually justifiable, and kind of really gets under the kind of viewer's skin. Miss 45 does a lot of that the same. I think it's spearheaded with really strong performances. The violence is really well tempered. The assault scenes are uncomfortable to watch, but that's designed that way, and they're not exploitative either, in a way where we discussed as comparison to movies that came before that had similar things. Like, it's not like I Spit in Your Grave or Last House on the Left. It's not on that level, but it is there to be a kind of psychological weight to the viewer beyond that point, and I think it handles it very well. It's got the perfect runtime. I mean, this movie's in and out in an hour and 20, and that's all you need for this. And it ends up in a way that you might not expect from the start. And that, when you talk about these genres, and we mentioned Death Wish as a comparison, where there's how many sequels to that? 5 or 6? Look, we never look at the protagonist whose actual actions are the actions of an antagonist. If we take a step back, we never glorify them in the movie, and Miss 45 manages to walk that line very, very, very tight, and as a result, it's kind of awesome. It's a 4.5 out of 5 for me in terms of reviews. Coming back to, I didn't know how I would take to it, but I really, really like this movie. It's gnarly, it's gritty, it's thought-provoking, and it's unashamedly in your face all the way through. It leaves you asking questions rather than being a movie that tells you the answers, and I am all for that. I'd much rather more movies did that, if I'm being honest. So there we go. So yeah, that's Miss 45. We're going to take a very, very, very short break. When I come back, I'm closing out the show right after this. And you've been watching the podcast or listening to the podcast Under the Stairs with episode 572, the long-awaited return, covering on this episode Miss 45, which has been released on Blu-ray, 4K and 4K UHD from the lovely folks over at Arrow Video. So thank you very much for checking out that. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. Kinda feels good to be back. Kinda feels like I had to put a critical hat on, which is weird because in the last year on the B-movie Blitzkrieg, I've been deliberately talking about bad movies, and that's kinda the point. Not always bad movies, but movies that are big on ideas and small on budget. So, like I said, I will be in the next week posting on this feed one of the episodes that we've recorded for B-Movie Blitzkrieg, and the way you can link to check that out if you've been clambering for more Duncan content and maybe a little bit of that Baz, then please go and check that out. As always, wherever you are checking this out, make sure you're subscribed, and that way you get all the other episodes. I have over 1,300 episodes in the back catalogue for this, and that's with taking almost a year off, so go figure. And yeah, we're back. We're back doing this probably one every 2 weeks. And if there's a sneaky one that appears in between, that's great. But anticipate one every 2 weeks for Podcasts Under the Stairs. I'm moving forward. The next episode I'll be dropping is the return of my reviews of the Slasher Classic Collection, covering the movie Skinned Alive, which is this number 51, which I watched last night. And if you were checking out my comments on Facebook, you'll know I instantly regretted saying I was going to be doing these pretty much from 5 minutes in. So a lot of fun to get to on that. Until then, wherever you are, whatever the time zone is and whatever you're up to in this big bad world of ours, please take care of yourselves out there. I am Duncan McLeish, broadcasting live from under the stairs, and I will speak to you next time.